If you enjoy stories that feel real, touch your heart, and leave you thinking long after they end, then you're in the right place. Welcome to Mr. Wisdom Stories. Travis didn't shout. He didn't slam a door. He didn't throw a plate across the kitchen. Standing beside the marble island in the home they had shared for almost 7 years, he looked at his wife with the calm confidence of a man who believed the conversation was already over. Outside, Charlotte was settling into a quiet evening after a summer rain. Water still clung to the maple trees lining the street, and somewhere in the distance a passing train broke the silence before fading away again. Inside the house, neither of them moved. Travis folded his arms across his chest and spoke as though he were pointing out something obvious. "You don't really have anything left to come home to." For a second, even the refrigerator seemed louder than either of them. Avery looked at him. She searched his face, almost waiting for the tiny smile that would tell her he'd gone too far and wanted to take the words back. It never came. She didn't argue, she didn't defend herself, she didn't remind him of the weekends she had spent comparing contractor estimates while he met clients. She didn't mention the savings she quietly poured into improving the very house he now claimed belonged only to him. She simply breathed in, slowly. Her fingers reached toward the small wooden bowl beside the front door. Her car keys rested exactly where she always left them. When she picked them up, the diamond on her wedding ring caught the kitchen light for the briefest moment, before her hand closed around the keys. She gave one small nod, not because she agreed, because she finally understood. Then she walked toward the front door. Travis expected her to stop. He expected her to turn around, maybe raise her voice, maybe cry, maybe tell him he was being unfair. Instead, the front door closed with a soft click. Not dramatically, just closed. That should have been the end of the argument. It wasn't even close. 3 months later, Travis sat inside the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, convinced the hardest part of the divorce would be defending the house. After all, the deed had always been in his name. His attorney opened a thick folder and quietly pushed it across the conference table. Travis frowned. Inside were hundreds of neatly organized pages. Contractor invoices, bank transfers, receipts, permit applications, photographs showing each stage of the renovations, cabinet installations, landscaping, solar panel upgrades, kitchen improvements, heating and cooling replacements. Every document was arranged by date, every payment had supporting records, every improvement pointed to the same person. Avery. His attorney lowered his voice. She documented everything. Travis stared at the pages. He remembered teasing Avery years earlier whenever she filed another receipt. He used to laugh and ask if she was planning to audit the whole neighborhood. She always smiled and said keeping records made life easier. He never asked why. Now he knew. His attorney looked directly at him. "This isn't about trying to take your house." He paused. "It's about proving she helped build it, and proving she never depended on it." Travis looked back at the folder. For the first time since Avery walked away, he wasn't thinking about the house. He was thinking about everything he had failed to notice while she was still living inside it. How do you tell someone they have nothing left to come home to, only to discover they were the one holding everything together? Welcome to Mr. Wisdom Stories. Here, we tell stories that touch the heart, challenge perspectives, and remind us how powerful life lessons can be. If you're new here, subscribe and become part of this journey. And before we continue, if you've ever seen someone mistake silence for weakness, leave a like and tell us where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that respect can disappear quietly, and sometimes that's exactly how people find themselves again. Have you ever watched someone underestimate the quietest person in the room? Someone who didn't argue, didn't fight, didn't try to prove a point, only to realize much later that their silence wasn't surrender at all. Because that's exactly what happened here. When Avery left that house, she didn't pack furniture. She didn't argue over who bought what. She didn't even take the family photographs hanging on the hallway wall. She walked out carrying only her purse, her keys, and the dignity Travis believed she would eventually trade for another chance to come back. He was certain she'd return within a day or two, maybe after she'd cooled off, maybe after realizing she had nowhere else to go. What he didn't know was that Avery had never stopped preparing herself for a future where respect mattered more than comfort, and what he would discover over the next few months wouldn't just challenge everything he believed about marriage. It would force him to answer one painful question. Can you really own a house if the person who made it feel like home has already decided never to walk back through the front door? Charlotte woke up earlier than most people realized. Before the morning traffic filled Interstate 77, before construction crews climbed onto unfinished rooftops, and before coffee shops welcomed long lines of commuters, the city already sounded alive. Delivery trucks backed into loading docks, sidewalks filled with people carrying laptops and breakfast sandwiches, cranes stretched above new apartment buildings that seemed to rise every month. The city was growing, and almost everyone living there believed they were building something. Avery loved that feeling. Every weekday she arrived at the regional bank 20 minutes before her shift officially started. It wasn't because anyone asked her to. She simply liked beginning the day without rushing. She would unlock her desk, straighten the papers left from the previous afternoon, refill the small candy dish she kept for customers, and glance over the appointment schedule before the lobby doors opened. By the time her co-workers arrived, Avery already had a warm cup of coffee beside her keyboard and a handwritten list of priorities waiting for her. One of her co-workers smiled as she walked past. "You know," she said, laughing softly, "one day I'm going to beat you here." Avery looked up with a grin. "I'll believe it when I see it. You've been saying that for 2 years, and you've been proving me right for 2 years." Both women laughed before the first customers began entering the branch. Avery enjoyed helping people understand their money instead of simply processing transactions. She never rushed older customers who wanted to ask questions. She patiently explained loan paperwork to young couples buying their first homes. When someone admitted they didn't understand interest rates or budgeting, she never made them feel embarrassed. Her grandparents had taught her that money wasn't a measure of success, it was a measure of responsibility. That lesson stayed with her every day she walked through the bank's front doors. Near lunchtime, an elderly customer folded a deposit receipt and smiled. "I always hope you're the one helping me," he said. Avery looked genuinely surprised. "Why's that?" "You explain things without making me feel foolish," she smiled. "My grandparents would be disappointed if I treated people any other way." The man tipped his cap before leaving. Moments like that mattered more to Avery than promotions or recognition. When her shift ended that Friday afternoon, she drove across Charlotte to a neighborhood where volunteers were helping build affordable homes through Habitat for Humanity. She changed into work boots, tied her hair back, signed the volunteer sheet, and accepted a pair of protective gloves. The smell of fresh lumber drifted across the lot. Power tools buzzed in the background. Children chased one another along the sidewalk while their parents painted trim or carried supplies. It felt less like a construction site and more like neighbors working toward the same goal. A confident voice called from the second floor of the unfinished house. "Hold that beam steady, perfect. Now bring it another inch." Avery glanced up. A tall man wearing a tool belt climbed carefully down the temporary stairs before thanking 2 volunteers who had helped position the framing. Instead of barking orders, he shook each person's hand. "Good work," he said. "Couldn't have done that alone." That caught Avery's attention. Leadership looked different when gratitude came naturally. She picked up a box of framing brackets and headed toward the supply area. Halfway there, one of the cardboard flaps gave way. Metal brackets spilled across the gravel. "Oh no," Avery muttered, crouching immediately. Another pair of hands reached for the scattered hardware at the same time. "Looks like these boxes gave up before you did." She looked up. It was the contractor she had noticed moments earlier. He smiled without any trace of embarrassment or impatience. "I'm Travis. Avery." He picked up the last bracket and placed it back inside the damaged box. "I should have warned everyone about those boxes. They've been falling apart all morning." "So this wasn't entirely my fault?" "Not even close." She laughed. "That's good to hear. I was already preparing an apology. I would have accepted it anyway." Their conversation paused naturally as another volunteer asked Travis where to stack plywood sheets. He answered the question, thanked the volunteer again, then turned back toward Avery without making her feel forgotten. "You volunteered here before?" "A few times." "What keeps bringing you back?" Avery looked around at the unfinished homes. "My grandparents used to tell me a house changes a family long before the family changes the house." Travis nodded slowly. "My dad used to say something similar." "What was his version?" "Build something worth standing inside when the weather gets bad." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The noise around them continued, but the silence between them felt comfortable instead of awkward. Avery pointed toward a stack of wall panels. "So, where do you need these?" "I'll show you." They spent the next hour carrying materials, measuring framing, and joking about which volunteer deserved the unofficial award for dropping the most nails. When someone offered bottled water, Travis made sure everyone else took one before grabbing his own. Avery noticed. Small habits revealed character. As the afternoon drew to a close, volunteers began cleaning the site. Travis washed sawdust from his hands at an outdoor sink before walking over. "You know," he said, Most people disappear the second cleanup starts. My grandparents would have called that unfinished work. He smiled. I had a feeling they'd raised you right. She smiled back. They certainly tried. Travis hesitated just long enough to suggest he wasn't rehearsing what came next. There's a small restaurant a few blocks from here. Avery waited. I usually stop there after volunteer days. He rubbed the back of his neck. I was wondering, would you like to have dinner with me next Saturday after we're finished here? Avery looked at him for a moment. Not because she didn't know the answer, because she heard another familiar voice inside her mind. Her grandmother's, soft, patient, certain. Pay attention to how someone treats your opinions before they ever ask for your heart. Avery met Travis's eyes again. She smiled. The answer formed quietly, but she wasn't ready to say it just yet. The following Saturday arrived with clear skies and the kind of Carolina warmth that made people reach for baseball caps before breakfast. Avery almost laughed at herself while choosing what to wear. It wasn't a date, at least not yet. She settled on a pair of jeans, comfortable work boots, and a light blue t-shirt before driving back to the Habitat build. The unfinished house looked different already. Exterior walls had gone up. The roofline was taking shape. Families from the neighborhood stopped by throughout the morning, some bringing lemonade, others simply thanking the volunteers. Charlotte had always been a city where people looked ahead, and every new home felt like another promise being kept. As Avery signed in, she noticed Travis helping an older volunteer unload lumber from a pickup truck. You don't have to carry those by yourself, Travis said. I've still got a few good years left, the older man answered. I don't doubt it, Travis grinned. But I'd rather you save those years than prove me wrong. The older man laughed and handed over half the load. Avery smiled to herself. There was something genuine about the way Travis spoke to people. He never acted as though being in charge made him more important than everyone else. When he spotted Avery walking across the lot, his face brightened. You came back. I said I volunteer here. I know, he smiled. I was hoping that wasn't just something people say when they're trying to be polite. You worried I'd disappear? A little, she laughed. That's a lot of pressure for one Saturday morning. I'll survive. They spent most of the morning installing insulation and carrying supplies from room to room. Their conversations came naturally. Sometimes they talked while working, sometimes they worked without talking at all. Neither silence felt uncomfortable. Around lunchtime, everyone gathered beneath a large white canopy where local restaurants had donated sandwiches and sweet tea. Travis looked at Avery. So? She raised an eyebrow. So? You never answered my question. She pretended to think. What question? The dinner question. Oh. She smiled, taking another sip of sweet tea. That question. I've been patiently waiting. No, you've been nervously waiting. I was trying to sound confident. It almost worked. He laughed. So? Avery nodded. I'd like that. The smile that crossed Travis's face looked completely unplanned. Next Saturday? Next Saturday. Good, good. One of the volunteers walked past and looked at both of them. I've been watching this conversation for 3 weeks. Avery blinked. 3 weeks? The woman laughed. Trust me, everybody else noticed before you two did. Both Avery and Travis looked at each other before laughing harder than either expected. Dinner turned into another dinner, then coffee after church one Sunday, then walks through Freedom Park when neither of them wanted the afternoon to end. Nothing about the relationship felt rushed. Neither tried to impress the other with expensive restaurants or extravagant gifts. Instead, Travis noticed the way Avery thanked restaurant servers by name. Avery noticed Travis always returned shopping carts instead of leaving them scattered across parking lots. Little things. The kind people usually overlooked. One evening they attended a neighborhood cookout hosted by friends from Habitat. Children played tag across the grass while music drifted from portable speakers. Someone challenged Travis to stand behind the grill. I can build houses, he warned. That doesn't mean I can cook. You'll figure it out. I've heard those words before. 20 minutes later, half the hamburgers were slightly overcooked. One batch of hot dogs looked as though they had survived a small house fire. Avery took one bite before looking at him. You know. She paused dramatically. I think this burger just filed a complaint. Travis stared at the burger. It isn't that bad. It has personality. That's not encouraging. It builds character. So people should only eat one? Everyone around them burst into laughter. For weeks afterward, Travis insisted he had been sabotaged by an unreliable grill. Avery never let him forget it. Autumn settled over Charlotte. Saturday mornings often began at another volunteer project before ending at local coffee shops where they talked for hours without realizing how much time had passed. One afternoon they attended a Charlotte Hornets game. The team lost in heartbreaking fashion after giving away a late lead. As disappointed fans slowly left their seats, Travis shook his head. "We should have left 3 minutes earlier." Avery smiled. "You don't leave people before the game's over." "The game was over." "No," she stood. "It was finished." He looked at her. "There's a difference." He laughed. "I've never heard anyone defend staying for a loss. My grandfather always stayed until the final whistle." "Why?" "He believed commitment shouldn't depend on the scoreboard." Travis thought about that longer than she expected. "I would have liked your grandparents." "They would have liked you too," she smiled. "Assuming you stop burning hamburgers. One mistake, several mistakes. You're keeping count? I work at a bank." "Of course you do." As the months passed, spending time together became effortless. Church on Sunday mornings, dinner afterward, family gatherings where everyone insisted they take leftovers home, holiday markets downtown. Even simple grocery shopping somehow became enjoyable. One evening, they stood in the kitchen of Avery's apartment deciding which pasta sauce to buy. She reached for one jar, Travis reached for another. "This one's better." "According to who?" "Me," she smiled. "I've had both." "So have I. I still like this one." He looked at her for a second before quietly placing her choice back on the shelf. "No." He picked up his own again. "Trust me," she laughed. "You're serious?" "It tastes better. You haven't even asked why I picked mine." "I already know mine's better." His grin made it sound playful, and in that moment, it was. She shrugged. "All right." As they walked toward the checkout line, Avery found herself smiling anyway. It wasn't about pasta sauce, it was about confidence. At least, that's how she interpreted it. The same thing happened choosing a movie, planning road trips, deciding which route to drive across town. Travis almost always preferred making the final decision. Never aggressively, never with anger, just naturally. He usually smiled afterward as though taking charge was simply part of who he was. Avery noticed it. More than once, but each time she remembered everything else about him. The patience he showed volunteers, the kindness he showed strangers, the way he thanked waiters, construction crews, cashiers and janitors exactly the same way he thanked successful business owners. Nobody was beneath his respect. So she told herself this habit wasn't control, it was confidence. Besides, every relationship required compromise, didn't it? She didn't realize she had quietly become the one doing most of it. Not yet. Those moments felt too small to matter. Like choosing a pasta sauce, like deciding where to eat, like selecting which road to take home. Each decision disappeared almost as quickly as it happened. But sometimes, the smallest habits become the strongest foundations, whether they're building love or something else entirely. Nearly 2 years after they first met at the Habitat build, Travis stood at the front of a small church in Charlotte, trying to look calm. He wasn't succeeding. He adjusted his tie for what had to be the 10th time. One of his friends chuckled. "If you touch that tie again, you're going to wear it out before the ceremony starts." Travis looked down. "I've done that already." "You've done it since we got here. I just don't want anything to go wrong." His friend smiled. "She's marrying you, Travis. I think she's already accepted a little imperfection." For the first time that morning, Travis laughed. On the other side of the church, Avery took one slow breath as she stood beside the stained glass window she had admired since she was a little girl. She wasn't nervous about marrying Travis. She was thinking about her grandparents, how her grandfather had once squeezed her hand and said, "Marriage isn't built on the wedding day, it's built on ordinary Tuesdays." At the time, she hadn't fully understood what he meant. Now she was beginning to. When the music began, the sanctuary grew quiet. Travis looked toward the back. The moment he saw Avery, every anxious thought disappeared. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wore a simple smile that reached her eyes. As she walked toward him, neither of them noticed the flowers lining the aisle or the guests quietly wiping away tears. For those few moments, it felt as though everyone else had faded into the background. The ceremony itself wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. They exchanged vows that sounded less like promises made for an audience and more like quiet commitments meant only for each other. To listen, to be patient, to carry life's burdens together, to build a home where both people felt safe. When the minister announced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. Travis leaned close enough for only Avery to hear. "We're finally a team." She smiled. "We already were." The first few months of marriage felt wonderfully ordinary. Saturday mornings began with pancakes that were never perfectly round because Travis insisted shape didn't affect taste. Sunday afternoons usually ended with family dinners that somehow sent them home carrying enough leftovers for half the week. Even grocery shopping became something they looked forward to. Neither of them believed happiness had to be expensive. They laughed often, apologized quickly, dreamed about the future while folding laundry or washing dishes together. One evening, Travis unfolded a sheet of paper across the dining room table. "I've been thinking." Avery looked over. "That's usually how projects start." "It is," he smiled. "I want us to move." She studied the sketch of a house she immediately recognized. His house, the one he had purchased years before they met. It had already been remodeled once, but Travis saw even more potential. "I've been using the place mostly as an investment," he explained. "But I think it's time it actually became our home." Avery looked at the photograph spread across the table. The house sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees. The backyard was larger than anything they had rented before. Sunlight poured through oversized living room windows. "It really is beautiful," she admitted. "I think so too." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'd love for us to build our future there." The words made Avery smile. Our future. That was what mattered to her. Not whose name appeared on paperwork, not who had signed documents years earlier. The life they would create together. A month later, moving day arrived. Boxes filled every room. Travis carried furniture while Avery carefully unpacked dishes, books, family photographs, and framed recipes handwritten by her grandmother decades earlier. By sunset, both of them were exhausted. They stood together in the living room, surrounded by unopened boxes. The house echoed because there was still so little inside. Travis slowly turned in a circle, then smiled proudly. "Now you finally have a real home." His words were meant as a compliment. She knew that. Still, something about the sentence lingered longer than she expected. She looked around the room before answering. "I think home is wherever we're together." He kissed her forehead. "Fair enough." The conversation moved on. So did she. Within weeks they began making plans for improvements. The kitchen worked, but both of them agreed it could function better. The backyard needed attention. The heating system wasn't as efficient as Travis wanted. His contracting business was expanding quickly, and he hoped to convert one spare bedroom into a proper home office where clients could review plans comfortably. Most evenings they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by catalogs, contractor estimates, paint samples, and budgeting spreadsheets. Those evenings became some of Avery's favorites. Not because they were spending money, because they were making decisions together. One Tuesday evening she closed her laptop and looked across the table. "I've been reviewing our savings." Travis looked up. "And?" "If we spread the projects over the next 18 months instead of doing everything immediately, we'll avoid unnecessary debt." He leaned closer. "What are you thinking?" She pointed toward the spreadsheet. "The office renovation should probably come first. It'll help your business." He nodded. "I agree." "Then the HVAC. Makes sense. Kitchen after that." He smiled. "I knew there was a reason I married someone who enjoys spreadsheets." She laughed. "Somebody has to." Over the next several months, Avery quietly began transferring money into their renovation account. Whenever contractors completed work, she paid invoices electronically. Each payment confirmation went into a neatly labeled folder. Printed copies followed. Receipts, warranty documents, building permits, inspection reports. Not because she expected problems, not because she doubted Travis. Quite the opposite. Her grandparents had taught her that every major financial decision deserved careful records. "Good memories fade," her grandfather often said. "Good records don't." The habit had become second nature, just like balancing her checkbook, just like paying bills before they were due, just like keeping emergency savings untouched. One Saturday afternoon, after the first phase of renovations was complete, several friends stopped by to celebrate. The remodeled kitchen drew compliments all afternoon. "The place looks incredible," someone said. Travis beamed. "I've had this vision for years." Avery smiled as she carried another tray of lemonade into the room. Someone admired the new custom cabinets. Another guest praised the redesigned workspace. Laughter filled the house. Then Travis wrapped an arm around Avery and grinned. "I guess she's finally getting used to living here." Everyone laughed. Before Avery could answer, Travis added with another playful smile, "It's still my house, though." The room laughed again. Someone jokingly raised a glass. Another guest teased Travis about protecting his territory. To everyone else, it sounded harmless. Avery smiled politely because that was easier than explaining why the words settled heavily in her chest. She looked around the room, the freshly painted walls, the new flooring, the kitchen she had helped design, the renovation budget she had spent months carefully planning, the invoices she had personally paid that morning before guests arrived. No one noticed her smile fade for the briefest moment. She quietly picked up the empty glasses from the coffee table and carried them into the kitchen. As warm water filled the sink, her grandmother's voice returned to her once again. Not loudly, just clearly enough to be remembered. Listen carefully to little sentences, Avery. She slowly rinsed another glass. They often become much bigger ones. Outside, laughter continued. Inside, Avery folded the newest renovation receipt and placed it inside the same organized folder she had been keeping since the first payment. Then she closed the drawer. Softly. Without knowing that years later, those ordinary pieces of paper would become the quietest and strongest voice she had left. By the beginning of 2026, the house barely resembled the one Avery had first walked into after the wedding. Not because it had become larger, because it had become more thoughtful. Every improvement solved a problem they had discovered while living there. The kitchen had been the first major project. The old layout forced everyone into one corner whenever more than 2 people tried to cook at the same time. Avery suggested widening the walkway between the island and the stove. "It'll make holidays easier," she said one evening, sliding a sketch across the table. Travis studied it. "You actually measured all of this?" "I measured it 3 times. Why 3? So I wouldn't have to apologize after we ordered cabinets." He laughed. "I've learned not to question your math." A week later, the order was placed. The custom cabinets arrived 6 weeks after that. Travis supervised the installation himself, but Avery handled the invoices, warranty registrations, and payment schedule. When the final cabinet door was adjusted into place, the installer smiled. "You two make a good team." Travis nodded proudly. "We've been lucky." Avery smiled too. She never felt the need to explain who had negotiated the price or arranged the payment timeline. The work spoke for itself. Not long afterward, the aging heating and cooling system began showing its age. One humid July afternoon, the upstairs bedroom refused to cool below 80 degrees. Travis stood beneath the ceiling vent with his hands on his hips. "That's it," he muttered. "This thing has officially retired." Avery looked up from her laptop. "I already called 3 companies." He blinked. "You did? I knew you were busy meeting clients today." She handed him a folder. "I compared their estimates. This company offers the best warranty, but this one has lower installation costs." Travis flipped through the pages. "You really did your homework." "I always do," he smiled. "Good." Within 2 weeks, the new energy-efficient system had been installed. The monthly utility bill dropped enough that Avery quietly adjusted their household budget, moving the savings into the renovation account. She didn't announce it, she simply updated the spreadsheet. As Travis's contracting business expanded, clients visited the house more often. The spare bedroom no longer worked as a storage room filled with moving boxes and old furniture. It needed to become a professional office. One Saturday morning, Avery stood inside the empty room with a tape measure. "What if the desk goes here?" Travis followed her gaze. "That leaves room for blueprints along the wall, and natural light for meetings." He imagined it for a moment. "I like that." Over the next month, painters, electricians, and flooring specialists transformed the room. Avery ordered furniture only after comparing prices from several suppliers. She scheduled deliveries around Travis's appointments so no client meetings had to be cancelled. When the invoices arrived, she reviewed each one carefully before sending payment. Every confirmation found its place inside the same organized filing system she had maintained since childhood. Nothing about it felt unusual to her. Responsibility had become routine. The backyard slowly changed too. The patchy grass disappeared beneath fresh landscaping. Native flowering plants replaced shrubs that constantly struggled through Charlotte's hot summers. A small stone walkway curved toward the patio where Travis liked grilling on weekends. One evening they stood outside after the landscapers finished. The air smelled faintly of fresh mulch and damp soil. Travis looked around. "I can't believe it's the same yard." Avery brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I can." He looked at her. "You can? I've been looking at the plans for months." He laughed. "Fair point." She slipped her hand into his. "It'll look even better next spring." The final project took the longest. Solar panels. Neither of them rushed the decision. For weeks, Avery researched energy incentives, tax credits, maintenance costs, and financing options. Most evenings ended with both of them sitting at the kitchen island, surrounded by brochures and notebooks. Travis leaned back in his chair one night. "My head hurts. Too much reading? Way too much." She smiled. "I narrowed it down to 2 companies. You already did?" "I highlighted the important parts." He opened the folder. Color-coded notes covered nearly every page. He shook his head in amazement. "I don't know how your brain works. My grandparents would have said patience is cheaper than replacing mistakes." He nodded thoughtfully. "I like that." After another week of discussion, they approved the installation. Months later, when the first noticeably lower electric bill arrived, Travis held it in the air. "Look at this." Avery glanced over. "I already did." "You knew?" "It came yesterday while you were meeting a client." "And you didn't say anything?" "I wanted you to enjoy the surprise." He crossed the kitchen and hugged her. "You're good for this house." She smiled against his shoulder. "We're good for this house." He nodded without noticing the difference between the 2 sentences. As each project finished, friends admired the visible changes. The bright kitchen, the comfortable office, the beautiful backyard, the quiet efficiency of the new heating system, the sleek solar panels reflecting the Carolina sun. Compliments came easily. Recognition rarely found Avery. That never seemed to bother her. She wasn't renovating the house for applause. She was helping build the life they had promised each other on their wedding day. Late one evening, after Travis had fallen asleep on the living room sofa with a television remote resting on his chest, Avery sat alone at the dining table. A neat stack of invoices waited beside her laptop. She checked each payment against the bank statement, attached digital copies to the matching folders, then filed the originals inside a small fireproof box. When she finished, she closed the lid gently and smiled to herself. Not because she had completed another task, because another responsibility had been taken care of. Her grandfather often ended long days with the same quiet sentence. "Peace comes easier when nothing important is left unfinished." Avery switched off the dining room light, looked once more at the home they had been building together, and followed the hallway toward their bedroom, believing with all her heart that every sacrifice they were making was strengthening the future they both wanted. The first changes in a marriage rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with slammed doors or dramatic arguments. More often, they settle into ordinary conversations until one day the ordinary no longer feels the same. Avery couldn't point to a single afternoon and say, "That's when everything changed." Instead, it happened one dinner at a time. One Tuesday evening, the dining table was covered with grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and brown rice. Travis walked in a few minutes late, dropped his truck keys into the same wooden bowl by the front door and loosened his collar. "Long day?" Avery asked. "You have no idea." She poured him a glass of iced tea before sitting across from him. "I looked over the numbers from last month's projects while I was balancing our budget." Travis picked up his fork. "How do they look?" "You've been paying suppliers faster than some of your commercial clients are paying you." He nodded. "I know. If those invoices keep taking 60 days to come in, your cash flow is going to feel tighter than it needs to." He chewed thoughtfully for a moment. "I'll figure it out." "I know you will." She smiled. "I was just thinking maybe shorter payment terms on future contracts would help." Before she finished the sentence, Travis lifted one hand. "Leave business to me." His voice wasn't angry. It sounded casual, matter-of-fact. Avery paused. "Of course." The conversation shifted to weekend plans. She let it go. A few days later, Travis stood in the home office reviewing blueprints spread across his desk. Avery walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "I thought you might need this." He smiled without looking up. "Perfect timing." She placed the mug beside him and noticed several handwritten notes covering one of the contracts. She studied the page for a second. "You missed one of the material costs." Travis looked up. "What?" "The delivery fees." He frowned. "No, I didn't." She gently pointed toward the estimate. "They're listed on the supplier's quote, but not on the client proposal." He looked again. A few seconds passed. Then he quietly reached for his calculator. "You're right," she smiled. "I only noticed because I reviewed similar invoices yesterday." Instead of smiling back, Travis sighed. "I've got it from here. I wasn't trying to take over." "I know." His tone stayed calm. "But leave business to me." Avery nodded once. "Okay." She picked up her empty coffee mug and walked back toward the kitchen. As she rinsed the cup beneath warm water, she found herself wondering why those 4 words stayed with her longer than the conversation itself. Life continued. Breakfast together before work. Evening walks through the neighborhood when the weather cooperated. Church on Sundays. Phone calls with family. From the outside, nothing appeared different. Inside the house, small moments accumulated. One Saturday morning, they visited a home improvement store to choose lighting for the upstairs hallway. Avery picked up a brushed nickel fixture. "I think this one matches the staircase better." Travis glanced at it before reaching for another. "This one." She compared both boxes. "The other one gives off warmer light." "I like this one." "It'll work." She smiled gently. "I just think the first option fits the house better." He placed his choice into the shopping cart. "This is the one we're buying." His answer wasn't harsh, it was final. She stood quietly for a moment before placing her preferred fixture back on the shelf. They continued shopping. Neither mentioned it again. Several weeks later, Travis invited a few potential clients to the house for an informal evening meeting. The office Avery had helped design looked polished. Framed blueprints covered one wall. Fresh coffee filled the room with a welcoming smell. Avery arranged bottled water and notepads before greeting everyone warmly. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. As the clients prepared to leave, one of them looked around the office. "This space is impressive." Travis smiled proudly. "We've put a lot into it." Avery smiled too. One of the clients turned toward her. "You must enjoy seeing his business grow." "I do." She genuinely meant it, because she remembered every late night spent comparing office furniture prices, every invoice, every delivery schedule, every contractor appointment arranged around Travis's calendar. Watching him succeed had never felt like a sacrifice. It felt like teamwork. That evening, after the clients left, Avery carried empty coffee cups toward the sink. They seemed happy. They were. Travis loosened his tie. "I think I'll land the project." "I hope so." She smiled. "There was one thing I noticed, though." He looked up. "What?" "The proposal mentions quarterly maintenance." "It does. You may want to include the response times more clearly." He leaned against the counter. "Avery." She stopped talking. "I've been doing this a long time. I know. You don't need to keep checking my work." She blinked. "I wasn't checking it." "I appreciate that you're trying to help," he sighed. "But leave business to me." The sentence landed differently this time, not because he spoke louder, because he had repeated it enough that it no longer sounded temporary. Avery looked down at the coffee mug in her hands. Tiny circles of foam floated across the surface. She rinsed it carefully before placing it inside the dishwasher. "All right," she answered quietly. The conversation ended there. As autumn settled over Charlotte again, Avery noticed something else changing. She no longer offered every opinion that came to mind, not because she had stopped thinking, not because she doubted herself, because she had begun predicting which conversations would end before they truly began. If Travis asked where they should eat, she answered. If he asked how her day went, she told him. But when discussions turned toward business, renovations, or long-term financial planning, she listened more than she spoke. One evening they reviewed household expenses together. Avery had prepared a simple spreadsheet showing how slightly different payment schedules could increase their emergency savings over the next year. She slid the page across the table. Travis glanced at it for only a few seconds before folding it closed. "I've already got a plan." She nodded. "I'm sure you do." "Avery," he softened his voice, "I don't want you worrying about every little detail. I wasn't worried. I'll handle it." She looked at him for a long moment. There had been a time when "I'll handle it" meant "we'll get through this together." Now, it sounded closer to "this doesn't need your voice." She smiled anyway, not because the feeling had disappeared, because she loved him enough to believe this season would pass. After dinner, she carried the plates into the kitchen, letting warm water run over them while Travis answered emails in the office. Neither of them realized that silence had quietly taken the seat where conversation used to live. It hadn't arrived all at once. It had been invited in a little at a time, and once it settled between them, it became harder to ask it to leave. The house had become exactly what Travis had imagined, bright, modern, comfortable. Every room felt intentional. Natural light poured through the enlarged kitchen windows each morning, reflecting softly against the white cabinets they had chosen together. The home office looked polished enough to welcome any client. The backyard had matured into a quiet retreat where birds gathered near the flower beds Avery had carefully planned according to the seasons, instead of simply choosing whatever looked pretty at the garden center. From the outside, the house looked like success. Inside, it looked like a marriage that still worked. Most people couldn't tell the difference. One Saturday afternoon, several neighbors wandered over while Travis grilled burgers on the patio. Children chased one another across the backyard while music played quietly from a speaker sitting near the deck. One neighbor slowly turned in a circle, taking in the landscaping. "I've lived on this street almost 15 years, he said. "This might be the nicest yard here now." Travis smiled. "We've put a lot of work into it. You can tell." The neighbor pointed toward the flower beds. "Those plants always look healthy." Avery looked up from arranging bowls of fruit on the patio table. "Most of them are native plants." The neighbor smiled politely. "Really? They survive our summers better." "Well," he laughed, "I'll have to ask Travis for his landscaping secrets." Before Avery could answer, Travis grinned. "I'll tell you everything I know." The conversation drifted toward construction, property values, and Charlotte's growing neighborhoods. Avery quietly carried another pitcher of lemonade outside. Nobody noticed. She wasn't offended. She had never volunteered for recognition. Still, there was something strange about watching people admire work they assumed belonged entirely to someone else. The following week, Travis hosted another client meeting. Business had never been better. His company was taking on larger residential projects, and referrals arrived almost every month. The office inside the house had become one of his favorite places. Clients often relaxed the moment they walked in. The room felt welcoming, professional, comfortable, exactly the atmosphere Avery had hoped it would create. Before the meeting began, she checked the coffee maker, arranged fresh notepads on the conference table, and placed bottled water beside each chair. Travis walked in carrying a folder. "You always think of everything," she smiled. "I try. You make this easy." Those words stayed with her. Not because they praised her, because they reminded her why she had invested so much of herself into both the business and the home. She believed they were building one future together. The meeting went well. Laughter drifted into the hallway several times. When the clients finally stood to leave, one of them paused in the doorway. "I've visited a lot of contractors over the years." He looked around the office. "This place tells people exactly who you are." Travis looked around proudly. "I appreciate that. It feels solid. That's what I was aiming for." The client nodded. "You built something impressive." Travis thanked him. Avery stood only a few feet away. She smiled politely while collecting empty coffee cups. No one realized she had spent weeks comparing flooring materials that could handle heavy foot traffic. No one knew she had negotiated the furniture delivery schedule around Travis's busiest workdays. No one noticed the filing cabinet she had researched after reading dozens of reviews because she wanted documents to stay protected for years. The office reflected Travis's success. It also reflected countless quiet decisions Avery had made without expecting anyone to remember them. Life settled into familiar routines again. Most evenings ended with Travis answering emails while Avery balanced household accounts. Stacks of receipts never overwhelmed the dining room table because she sorted them before they had the chance. One folder held utility bills, another contained renovation warranties, another tracked maintenance expenses. Business purchases stayed completely separate from personal finances. Her grandfather had always believed organization reduced stress before problems ever appeared. Avery still lived by that lesson. One evening, Travis walked through the dining room carrying a bowl of popcorn. He glanced toward the folders spread neatly across the table. "You still keeping every receipt?" She looked up. "I always will." He chuckled. "I don't know how you remember where everything goes." "I don't," she smiled. "The labels remember for me." He laughed. "I guess that works." He walked into the living room to watch a basketball game. Avery returned to organizing paperwork. Nothing about the moment felt unusual. She wasn't building evidence, she was maintaining order, exactly as she always had. Several weeks later, one of Travis's largest projects reached completion. To celebrate, he invited a group of business contacts, neighbors, and longtime clients to the house for an informal evening gathering. The weather cooperated perfectly. String lights glowed above the patio. Fresh flowers decorated the outdoor dining table. The smell of grilled food drifted through the backyard. Guests admired almost everything they saw. "The kitchen belongs in a magazine. I love what you've done with the office. Those solar panels were a smart investment. This backyard is incredible." Every compliment seemed to circle back to Travis. He thanked everyone warmly. Avery moved comfortably from conversation to conversation, making sure drinks stayed full and everyone felt welcome. She genuinely enjoyed hosting. Her grandparents had always said people remembered how they felt inside your home long after they forgot what was served for dinner. She wanted every guest to leave feeling appreciated. As the evening continued, someone asked Travis how long the renovations had taken. He looked around proudly before answering. "A few years. Worth every minute. I'd say so." Another guest raised a glass. "You really built something special here." Travis smiled. He looked around the property for a moment before speaking. "This," he paused briefly, "is something I built." The sentence floated across the patio with complete confidence. Several guests nodded in admiration. Someone applauded lightly. Another joked that Travis should start giving neighborhood renovation tours. Laughter spread naturally through the group. Avery stood beside the outdoor table holding a tray of iced tea. Her smile remained exactly where it belonged. Warm, polite, steady. No one watching her would have guessed the sentence had landed differently than Travis intended. Because she wasn't thinking about walls, or windows, or landscaping. She was remembering evenings spent comparing contractor estimates while everyone else slept. She remembered transferring money from her savings account without hesitation because improving their home had felt like investing in their marriage. She remembered researching tax credits for the solar installation, scheduling inspections, paying invoices, tracking warranties, ordering replacement materials after one shipment arrived damaged. She remembered believing every decision belonged to both of them. The applause faded. Conversations resumed. Music filled the silence. Avery carried the tray back inside the house before anyone noticed her lingering near the doorway. She set the empty glasses inside the sink and rested both hands on the countertop for only a second. Not because she wanted sympathy, not because she wanted recognition, because she suddenly understood how easy it was for quiet contributions to disappear behind visible success. After a long breath, she straightened her shoulders, picked up another tray of drinks, and walked back outside with the same welcoming smile every guest had seen all evening. No one realized anything had changed, but somewhere deep inside Avery, one small piece of certainty had become just a little harder to hold. Charlotte kept growing. New apartment buildings climbed higher above the skyline. Restaurants opened faster than anyone could keep track of them. Construction cranes still dotted the horizon. From the outside it looked as though opportunity had no end. But inside the construction industry, things had begun to shift. Projects that once moved quickly now paused while developers reconsidered budgets. Material costs rose again. Several commercial clients delayed signing contracts they had spent months discussing. For the first time in years, Travis found himself checking his phone more often than it rang. Monday mornings no longer began with excitement. They began with waiting for calls, waiting for approvals, waiting for decisions that seemed to stretch further away each week. One morning, Travis stood inside the home office staring at a calendar covered with handwritten notes. Several meetings had already been crossed out. Another had been moved to the following month. He rubbed both hands across his face before closing the notebook. Avery stepped quietly into the doorway carrying breakfast. "I figured you hadn't eaten." He looked up. "I wasn't hungry." "You usually say that when you're worried." "I'm not worried." She placed the plate beside him anyway. "You don't have to pretend with me." For a long moment he said nothing. Finally he leaned back in his chair. "I've never had this many projects sitting in limbo." She pulled another chair beside his desk. "That doesn't mean they're gone." "No," he looked toward the window, "but it means people are hesitating." Avery listened without interrupting. Sometimes people needed answers. Sometimes they simply needed someone willing to stay in the room while they searched for them. Over the next several weeks, Travis spent longer hours chasing work that had once seemed to find him naturally. He made more phone calls, sent more proposals, followed up on conversations that used to require only a single meeting. When he came home each evening, he looked physically tired in a way Avery hadn't seen before. One Thursday night she handed him a glass of water as he loosened his boots near the front door. "Rough day?" He managed a tired smile. "I spent 6 hours trying to schedule meetings that should have taken 20 minutes. She sat beside him. "Things will pick up." "I hope you're right. I've watched you solve harder problems." He nodded. "I know." For a moment the old Travis returned, the one who thanked her for believing in him, the one who reached over and squeezed her hand before heading upstairs to shower. Those moments reminded Avery why she kept believing this difficult season would eventually pass. But stress has a way of changing ordinary conversations. One evening, Avery noticed several unopened envelopes on the kitchen counter. She picked them up. "These supplier statements came today. I'll get to them. They're due next week. I said I'll get to them." She looked at him carefully. "I wasn't criticizing you." "I know." His answer came quickly, too quickly. I'm just tired. She quietly placed the envelopes back where she had found them. Okay. Later that night, while Travis slept, Avery reviewed their household budget. She wasn't searching for mistakes. She wanted to see whether temporarily adjusting a few expenses might reduce some of the pressure he was carrying. The next evening she waited until dinner. I've been thinking. Travis continued eating. About what? If we delay replacing the patio furniture another year, we could move that money into the business emergency fund. He barely looked up. We already talked about that. I know. I've got it handled. I wasn't saying you didn't. He set his fork down. Avery. She stopped speaking. You don't need to solve every problem. Her expression softened. I wasn't trying to solve it. I know. He rubbed his forehead. I'm just asking you to trust me. I do trust you. Then let me handle it. The conversation ended there. Not because either of them wanted it to, because both of them felt too tired to keep talking. As the weeks passed, little disagreements appeared where laughter used to live. One Saturday morning they drove to the grocery store. A simple discussion about buying ingredients for dinner somehow turned into silence halfway through the produce section. Another evening they debated whether Travis should hire temporary office help. Neither raised their voice. Yet somehow both finished the conversation feeling unheard. Nothing dramatic happened. No insults, no slammed doors. Only two people slowly discovering that carrying unspoken worries eventually becomes heavier than carrying groceries. One Friday evening, Avery found Travis sitting alone on the back patio after sunset. The grill sat cold beside him. His phone rested face down on the table. She joined him without speaking. For several minutes they simply listened to the distant sound of traffic moving across the city. Finally Travis broke the silence. I keep thinking I'm one good contract away from fixing everything. Avery looked at him. And if it doesn't happen this month? He didn't answer immediately. I don't know. She reached across the table and gently covered his hand with hers. You don't have to carry every burden by yourself. He stared at their hands. I've always been the one who's supposed to provide. You already do. What if that changes? It doesn't change who you are. He wanted to believe her. She could see it in his eyes. But worry had settled too deeply. It was becoming louder than reassurance. Inside the house, life continued as usual. Laundry still needed folding. Bills still arrived. Breakfast still had to be made before work. From the outside, nothing seemed different. Inside, however, every difficult day left a small mark that neither of them talked about. The marks were almost impossible to notice one at a time. Together, they slowly changed the atmosphere of the home. One evening, Avery stood at the kitchen sink while Travis answered another business call inside the office. His voice sounded professional, confident, patient. When the call ended, he walked into the kitchen looking exhausted. Without thinking, Avery asked quietly, Did it go well? He opened the refrigerator. They're still deciding. She nodded. I hope they call back. So do I. Neither spoke again. The silence wasn't angry. It was simply full of uncertainty, full of pressure, full of conversations that kept ending before either of them truly said what they meant. And although neither Avery nor Travis realized it that night, the sentence that would change both of their lives forever was already much closer than either of them could imagine. Rain began falling just before 6 o'clock. Not a heavy storm. Just enough to leave the streets of Charlotte shining beneath passing headlights. Avery pulled into the driveway, switched off the engine and sat quietly for a few seconds. The day at the bank had been unusually busy. She should have felt tired. Instead, she felt hopeful. Earlier that afternoon, one of her older customers had smiled after finally paying off the last balance on a loan. I've been waiting 20 years for this day, he had said. Avery congratulated him with genuine excitement. As she drove home afterward, she found herself thinking about fresh starts. Maybe tonight could be one. Maybe she and Travis simply needed one evening without budgets, proposals, delayed contracts, or unfinished conversations. She carried 2 grocery bags inside. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of Travis talking on the phone inside the office. His voice was steady, professional. She couldn't hear every word, but she recognized the tone. Another client, another proposal, another conversation ending with, "We'll let you know." A few minutes later, the office door opened. Travis walked into the kitchen. He looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. Avery smiled. I picked up your favorite pasta. He looked at the grocery bags before answering. Thanks. I thought we could have a quiet evening. That sounds good. His voice carried almost no energy. She reached for the cutting board while he silently unpacked the groceries. For several minutes they worked beside each other without speaking. The familiar rhythm almost felt comforting. Vegetables were chopped, water boiled. Garlic filled the kitchen with its warm smell. For a brief moment, Avery believed they had found their way back to each other. Dinner was ready 40 minutes later. They sat across from one another at the same table where they had planned renovations, laughed over burned hamburgers and dreamed about the future. Tonight, conversation struggled to begin. "How was work?" Avery asked. "Busy," she nodded. "The bank stayed full all day." She took another bite before speaking again. "I was thinking about something." Travis nodded without looking up from his plate. "We haven't had a day to ourselves in months." He continued eating. "I know. What if we fix that?" He finally looked at her. "What do you mean? We could leave Saturday morning." She smiled gently. "Nothing expensive. We don't have to fly anywhere. We could drive to the mountains for the day, or even just turn our phones off and spend the afternoon walking downtown." She laughed softly. "It doesn't really matter where. She searched for the right words. "I miss us." The room became quiet, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Travis leaned back in his chair. "I can't right now. It's only one weekend. I've got too much going on. I know. I'm not asking you to ignore work. I'm asking you to breathe for one day." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand how much pressure I'm under." She answered carefully. "I know you're carrying a lot, and that's exactly why I'm asking. You haven't stopped working in weeks. You barely sleep. You answer emails during dinner. You answer calls before breakfast. I miss talking to my husband." He stared at his untouched glass of water. "You think I want this?" "No. I think you're trying to fix everything by yourself. I am fixing it. You don't have to do it alone." His chair scraped lightly against the floor as he shifted forward. "There it is." She blinked. "What? You keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Trying to manage everything. I'm not trying to manage you. I'm trying to help. I didn't ask for help." She took a slow breath. "I know. But marriage isn't waiting until someone asks. Sometimes we help because we love each other." His patience finally gave way. "Avery." She stopped speaking. "I've been building this business for years. I know. I've carried this house. I know you've worked hard. I've carried this family. We've carried it." The correction escaped her before she could soften it. Neither of them moved. The words hung between them. Travis looked at her as though he had heard something entirely different. "We?" His voice was calm, too calm. Avery realized immediately where the conversation had gone. "That's not what I meant. I wasn't comparing us. I was talking about partnership." He laughed once. There wasn't any humor in it. "Partnership," she nodded. "Yes, you've helped. I've never said you haven't. But lately," he looked around the kitchen, "it feels like every conversation ends with you telling me how to run my business." Her shoulders fell. "I've never tried to run your business. I've only wanted to make life easier. I've watched you wear yourself down. I've watched you stop sleeping. I've watched you stop smiling, and I don't know how to reach you anymore." For just a second, the hurt on Travis's face became visible. He looked tired, older than he had only a few months before. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then looked toward the living room instead of at Avery. "You don't get it." "Then help me understand." "You can't. Try me." Silence settled over the table. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. Finally Travis spoke. "I bought this house." Avery frowned slightly. "I know. I took the risks, I know. I signed the loans, I know. I built everything that's standing here." Avery looked at him with quiet disbelief. "You didn't build it alone." The sentence wasn't angry, it wasn't even loud, it was simply true. Travis stood, his chair slid backward across the hardwood floor. "You still don't understand." Avery remained seated. "Then explain it to me." Instead, he looked directly into her eyes. His voice never rose. It didn't have to. "You don't really have anything left to come home to." Everything inside the room seemed to stop. The refrigerator hummed softly. Rain continued falling outside. Somewhere down the street, a car drove through standing water. Neither of them moved. Avery searched his face. She waited, one heartbeat, then another. She kept expecting him to shake his head, to say he didn't mean it, to apologize before the silence became permanent. He didn't. She looked around the kitchen they had planned together. The cabinets she had measured, the countertops she had compared for weeks, the dining table where they had dreamed about growing old. None of those memories argued with him. Neither did she. Slowly, Avery pushed her chair back. She stood without saying a word. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She walked toward the front door with the same quiet composure she had carried through every difficult season of her life. On the small table beside the entrance sat the wooden bowl where they always left their keys. She reached inside, her fingers closed around hers. The diamond on her wedding ring caught the kitchen light for the briefest instant. She looked back once, not with anger, not with hatred, only with the heartbreaking realization that the man standing in front of her no longer heard the woman who had spent years standing beside him. She gave the smallest nod, a silent acknowledgement that she had finally heard what he truly believed. Then she opened the front door. Cool evening air drifted inside. Without another word, Avery stepped outside. The door closed behind her softly, not slammed, not forced, just closed. Travis remained exactly where he was. He stared at the front door for several seconds. His breathing slowly steadied. He told himself she only needed time. She'd stay with a friend, drive around the city, cool off. She had done neither shouting nor crying. That had to mean tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow they'd talk. Tomorrow she'd come home. He didn't realize that the quietest goodbye of his life had already happened. The first thing Avery noticed after closing the front door wasn't the rain. It was the silence. No voices. No unfinished argument following her down the driveway. No footsteps racing after her. She stood beneath the porch light for only a moment before walking toward her car. Raindrops settled gently across the windshield. She unlocked the driver's door, slipped inside, and rested both hands on the steering wheel. Her heart was beating faster than usual, not because she was afraid, because 7 years of memories don't fit neatly inside one sentence. She closed her eyes, for just a few seconds. Then she started the engine. Charlotte looked different at night. Streetlights reflected across rain-soaked pavement. Restaurants were still busy. People laughed beneath covered patios. Traffic moved steadily through intersections as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Life continued. It always did. Avery drove without turning on the radio. The quiet gave her room to think. She replayed the evening over and over, not searching for a better response, not wishing she had shouted. She knew herself well enough to understand that anger would have changed nothing. What stayed with her wasn't the argument. It was the certainty in Travis's voice. He hadn't spoken out of momentary frustration. He had spoken from belief. That realization hurt more than the sentence itself. Less than 30 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of a condominium building she knew as well as the house she had just left. The condo had belonged to her before the marriage. She had never sold it. Instead, she had rented it to help strengthen their finances while they focused on renovating the house together. Only a few weeks earlier, the tenant's lease had ended. Avery had cleaned the unit herself, intending to prepare it for another renter when life became less busy. She never imagined she would be the next person carrying a suitcase through its front door. She unlocked the door. The familiar smell of fresh paint greeted her. Most of the furniture remained covered with protective sheets. The kitchen was simple. The living room was quiet. Nothing about the space felt luxurious. It didn't need to. It felt peaceful. She walked from room to room, switching on lights one by one. Everything waited exactly as she had left it. Finally, she sat on the edge of the sofa without removing her coat. For the first time all evening, she allowed herself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. The tears came quietly before disappearing just as quietly. When they stopped, she wiped her face, stood and carried her purse into the bedroom. Tomorrow would arrive whether she felt ready or not. The alarm sounded at 6 o'clock the following morning. Avery opened her eyes almost immediately. For a brief second she expected to hear Travis moving around the kitchen. Instead, she remembered where she was. She lay still, then sat up. Routine had always helped her through difficult seasons, so she followed it. She made the bed, brewed coffee, packed a simple lunch, pressed her work clothes. By 7:30 she was driving toward the bank. No one there knew what had happened, and she wasn't ready to tell them. She greeted customers with the same kindness she always had. She answered questions, balanced accounts, explained loan documents, smiled sincerely. The work grounded her. Money followed rules. People sometimes didn't. That evening she returned to the condo carrying groceries instead of takeout. She cooked enough soup for several days. washed the dishes immediately after dinner, folded laundry while listening to soft jazz. The ordinary rhythm of everyday life slowly settled around her again. There was comfort in completing small tasks. One finished responsibility led naturally to the next. Her grandparents had lived that way. Now she understood why. Nearly a week passed before Avery finally opened the small fireproof box she had brought from the house. She placed it carefully on the dining table. For several minutes she simply looked at it. Inside were years of carefully organized records, household budgets, contractor invoices, electronic payment confirmations, warranty information, inspection reports, bank transfer records. She opened the lid, not with anger, not looking for evidence against Travis. She was looking for clarity, nothing more. One folder after another rested exactly where she remembered placing it. She reviewed each document slowly, sometimes smiling when she remembered the excitement of choosing kitchen cabinets, sometimes pausing after seeing photographs taken during the landscaping project. Those papers represented more than money. They represented weekends, conversations, plans, sacrifices, shared dreams. She carefully placed each folder into chronological order before creating a digital backup on her laptop. Not because she expected a legal battle, because important financial records deserved protection. They always had. That habit hadn't changed simply because her address had. Over the following days, another routine quietly returned. Savings. Every payday she transferred money into the same emergency account she had maintained for years. Not because she expected disaster, because financial stability had always given her peace of mind. She reviewed her monthly expenses, adjusted the budget to reflect living alone again, cancelled a few automatic deliveries she no longer needed, updated her mailing address. Every decision was practical, measured, calm. Friends might have expected dramatic social media posts, late-night phone calls, public accusations. Avery chose none of those things. Some chapters in life don't need an audience, they need honesty. Meanwhile, Travis never called. Not the first night, not the second, not even after a week. Avery noticed. She also noticed that she had stopped waiting for the phone to ring. One evening she stood beside the condo window watching rain drift across the parking lot. Almost the same kind of rain that had fallen the night she left. She rested one hand lightly against the glass. There was still sadness, there was still disappointment. But beneath both emotions, something else had quietly begun to grow. Peace. Not because everything had been resolved, because she no longer had to convince anyone that her voice deserved a place inside her own home. She already knew it did, and for the first time in a very long while, she realized she had finally come home to herself. The first Saturday after Avery left arrived with clear skies and unusually cool morning air. For years, Saturdays had followed a rhythm neither of them ever talked about. Coffee, breakfast, music playing softly through the kitchen speaker, a list of errands resting on the counter. One of them would eventually suggest stopping for lunch somewhere they had never tried before. The routine had never felt remarkable, until it disappeared. Travis opened his eyes just after 7. For a few seconds he stayed exactly where he was, staring at the ceiling. His mind reached automatically for familiar sounds. Cabinet doors opening, coffee brewing, footsteps moving down the hallway. There was nothing, only the quiet hum of the air conditioner. He rolled onto his side and looked toward the bedroom door. Still closed. The empty space beside him looked strangely larger than it had only a week earlier. He sat up slowly. "She's probably just staying at the condo a little longer," he muttered to himself. The sentence sounded more convincing in his head than it did out loud. He wandered into the kitchen wearing an old t-shirt and jeans. The room looked exactly as it had the night Avery walked out. The countertops were spotless. The coffee maker sat ready on the corner. Nothing had moved. He reached for the coffee beans before realizing they weren't where he expected. He checked another cabinet, then another. Finally, after opening 4 different doors, he found them inside a labeled storage container. He laughed once. "Babe." The word escaped before he caught himself. No answer came back. He measured the coffee by memory. It tasted stronger than usual. He poured half of it into the sink. Avery always adjusted the amount depending on the roast. He had never noticed. After breakfast, Travis decided to catch up on paperwork. He carried his laptop into the home office, opened several project files and tried to focus. 20 minutes later, he realized he had read the same proposal 3 times without remembering a single sentence. His phone remained unusually quiet. One client postponed a meeting. Another asked for more time before making a decision. By noon, Travis pushed away from the desk and rubbed both eyes. Normally this was the point in the day when Avery would appear in the doorway. She never interrupted. She simply leaned against the frame and asked one question. "Have you eaten?" He hadn't appreciated how often she asked until no one asked anymore. He ordered takeout instead. The food arrived quickly. Half of it went untouched. That afternoon he walked through the backyard carrying a garden hose. Several flowers near the patio looked dry. He watered them carefully, trying to remember which plants needed more attention. Everything looked healthy enough. Still, something felt slightly different. He couldn't explain why. The yard was cleaner than ever. The grass had recently been cut. The stone walkway still curved neatly through the garden. Nothing was broken. Yet the space somehow felt unfinished. Only after several minutes did he realize what was missing. The small folding chair Avery always carried into the garden while trimming flowers wasn't beside the flower beds anymore. He looked toward the storage shed. It wasn't there either. She must have taken it. He stood quietly for a moment before turning off the water. Sunday felt even longer. Church wasn't something Travis usually skipped. This week he did. He told himself he had too much work. The truth felt more uncomfortable. He didn't want to answer questions. He wasn't ready for someone to ask where Avery was. Instead, he stayed home and tried cleaning the house. Vacuuming gave him something to do. Dusting shelves filled another hour. Laundry occupied the afternoon. The work wasn't difficult. It simply felt endless. By evening he found himself standing in the hallway looking toward the living room. The house echoed differently now. He had never realized Avery often left soft jazz playing while she moved from room to room. Not loudly, just enough to make silence feel less empty. Without it, every footstep sounded sharper. Every room seemed farther away from the next. Monday morning arrived. Travis left for work before sunrise. When he returned that evening, the driveway looked exactly as he had left it. One car, one set of tire tracks, one porch light waiting beside the front door. He unlocked the house and instinctively glanced toward the kitchen. No dinner simmered on the stove. No handwritten grocery list rested beneath the fruit bowl. No fresh flowers stood in the vase near the sink. He opened the refrigerator. There was food, enough for several meals, but none of it reflected planning. It was simply whatever he had grabbed from the grocery store without thinking. He closed the door and leaned against it. The house still worked. The lights came on. The appliances ran perfectly. The office remained organized. The backyard still looked beautiful. Every renovation they had completed continued doing exactly what it was designed to do. Everything functioned. Nothing felt like home. That night, Travis carried his dinner into the living room and switched on the television. A basketball game filled the screen. Normally he would have called Avery into the room after a great play. She never pretended to understand every rule. She simply enjoyed watching him enjoy it. Tonight he watched the game without hearing his own laughter. Halfway through the second quarter, he reached for his phone. Her name remained exactly where it had always been. His thumb hovered over the call button. He pictured her answering. He pictured himself saying, "Can we talk?" Instead, another thought interrupted him. She just needs a little more time. Tomorrow she'll probably call. He locked the phone and placed it back on the coffee table. Outside, evening settled quietly across the neighborhood. Inside, Travis sat alone in the beautifully renovated home he had once been so proud of. For the first time since Avery left, he couldn't ignore the truth. A house could hold every comfort money could buy, and still feel painfully empty when the person who made it feel alive was no longer inside it. The second week without Avery brought something Travis hadn't expected. It wasn't loneliness. He had already begun adjusting to eating dinner alone. It wasn't the quiet. Even silence eventually became familiar. It was the constant interruption of small problems that had never existed before. On Tuesday morning, he stood in the kitchen staring at an empty carton of milk. He could have sworn he had bought one only a few days earlier. He opened the refrigerator again. Nothing. He checked the pantry. Then remembered Avery always kept a shopping list attached to the side of the refrigerator with a small magnet shaped like North Carolina. The magnet was still there. The notepad beneath it wasn't. For years she had quietly written down anything that needed replacing the moment she noticed it. He had never thought about it. Now he found himself grabbing his truck keys before work just to stop at a grocery store. The trip only took 10 minutes. Still, it was one more thing he hadn't planned. By Wednesday afternoon, another problem appeared. One of his clients called asking for a copy of a warranty certificate from an earlier renovation. "No problem," Travis answered confidently. "I'll send it this afternoon." He ended the call and walked into the office. The warranty should have been easy to find. Instead, he spent nearly 45 minutes opening drawers, searching filing cabinets, and checking old folders. Finally, he stopped. He leaned both hands against the desk. Where did Avery keep those documents? The answer came almost immediately. Exactly where she always kept them. Inside the fireproof document box. He walked into the dining room. The cabinet where the box had always been sat empty. Only then did he remember watching Avery carry it out of the house the night she left. She hadn't taken it because she planned to fight. She had taken it because it contained years of important records. He called the supplier instead and requested another copy. They promised to email it. As he hung up, he realized something uncomfortable. He hadn't actually known how their paperwork was organized. He had simply trusted that Avery always knew. The following Saturday, Travis drove across town to pick up supplies for a remodeling project. On the way home, he passed the neighborhood where he and Avery had first volunteered together through Habitat for Humanity. Without thinking, he slowed the truck. The same organization was working on another home only a few streets away. Volunteers carried lumber across the yard. Someone laughed after dropping a tape measure. A young couple painted porch railings together while talking about something that made both of them smile. For a moment, Travis remained parked along the curb. A memory surfaced so clearly it almost felt present. A cardboard box had fallen apart. Metal framing brackets scattered across the gravel. A woman crouched to gather them before he reached down to help. "I'm Travis. Avery," he remembered, laughing. Remembered how naturally conversation had followed. He smiled despite himself. Then another memory arrived. Burned hamburgers at a neighborhood cookout. Avery trying to keep a straight face while calling them full of personality. He had laughed so hard his stomach hurt. The smile faded. He pulled away from the curb and continued driving home. That evening he opened the refrigerator again, almost automatically. He stared at shelves filled with random groceries, bread, eggs, cheese, leftover takeout. Nothing seemed to fit together. Avery had always planned meals several days ahead. One night's dinner usually became the next day's lunch. Fresh vegetables were used before they spoiled. Nothing went to waste. Now, he kept throwing food away because he bought whatever looked good in the moment. He quietly closed the refrigerator. "I never noticed." The words escaped before he realized he'd spoken aloud. Sunday afternoon brought another reminder. His phone displayed a calendar notification. Family dinner. He stared at the screen. For years, Avery had quietly kept track of birthdays, anniversaries, and family gatherings. She always remembered who preferred phone calls instead of text messages. She mailed handwritten cards weeks before holidays. She somehow knew exactly when someone needed encouragement. Travis rarely questioned how those things happened. He simply enjoyed being part of them. This time, he almost forgot entirely. He sat down on the edge of the bed and rubbed his forehead. How many things had she carried without ever mentioning them? As business slowed further, the emotional weight became harder to separate from everything else. One afternoon, Travis misplaced an important estimate. Normally, he would have called toward the kitchen. "Avery, have you seen the Henderson file?" Almost every time she answered before he finished the question. "Second drawer. Blue folder. Behind the insurance papers." She never sounded annoyed. She simply remembered. Now he searched for nearly an hour before discovering the folder exactly where he had left it himself. He laughed once. It wasn't funny. It was humbling. That night, sleep came slowly. Travis lay awake staring into the darkness. Instead of thinking about contracts, his mind drifted toward ordinary evenings he had barely noticed while living them. Avery standing at the stove humming softly while stirring soup. The smell of cornbread cooling on the counter after Sunday dinner. Her reminding him to call family members before birthdays slipped past. The way she quietly sat beside him after difficult meetings without demanding conversation. Sometimes she simply rested her hand over his. Nothing more. At the time he had believed comfort arrived naturally. Now he understood. Someone had been creating it every single day. The realization continued growing over the following week. It appeared in unexpected places. A light bulb that had always seemed to replace itself. The neatly folded towels waiting in the linen closet. The annual maintenance reminders arriving exactly when they were needed. The organized budget spreadsheets that kept unexpected expenses from becoming emergencies. None of those things happened by accident. Neither had the peace he once associated with home. He had mistaken consistency for simplicity. He had mistaken quiet effort for small effort. One evening he stood alone in the kitchen looking around the room they had built together. His eyes rested on the custom cabinets, then the backyard through the window, then the office down the hallway. For years he had believed those rooms reflected his hard work. Now another thought entered his mind. They also reflected Avery's patience, her planning, her discipline, her willingness to keep carrying responsibilities no one applauded. He slowly lowered himself into one of the kitchen chairs. For the first time since she walked away, he stopped asking himself why Avery had left. Instead, he began asking a much more difficult question. How had he lived beside someone for so many years without ever fully seeing everything she had been carrying? 3 weeks later, the paperwork finally began. Neither Avery nor Travis had called the process a fight. There'd been no angry text messages, no arguments through lawyers, no demands, only documents, dates, signatures, appointments. Everything moved with the same quiet restraint that had marked the end of their marriage. The morning of Travis's meeting arrived grey and overcast. He parked outside the law office several minutes early but remained inside his truck. His hands rested on the steering wheel. He looked toward the entrance. He had expected this meeting to feel like another business appointment. Instead, it felt strangely personal, not because he feared losing the house, because walking through those doors meant admitting the marriage had reached a place neither of them had imagined on their wedding day. After a long breath, he stepped out and walked inside. The conference room was simple. A polished table, 2 chairs, a large window overlooking downtown Charlotte. His attorney entered carrying a slim briefcase. "Good morning, Travis." "Morning." The attorney sat down, opened a notebook and reviewed several routine items first. Property information, mortgage balance, business ownership, insurance. The conversation remained calm, professional, exactly as Travis expected. Then the attorney reached into the briefcase. "I've received documentation from Avery's attorney." Travis nodded. "I figured." A thick folder appeared on the table. It landed with a quiet weight, not dramatic, just substantial. The attorney rested one hand on the cover. "I'd like us to review this carefully." Travis leaned forward. "Go ahead." The folder opened. The first section contained renovation invoices arranged by year, each contractor, each supplier, each payment. Nothing appeared random. Everything followed a timeline. The attorney turned another page. Electronic bank transfers, highlighted, cross-referenced, matched to invoice numbers, another page, inspection reports, permit approvals, photographs documenting different stages of construction, the kitchen before demolition, the kitchen after installation, the office before flooring, the office after completion. Solar panel installation, landscaping, heating system replacement. Each photograph carried dates, each project connected to matching financial records. Travis stared silently. "I don't understand," he finally said. The attorney looked toward him. "What part?" "Why would she organize all of this?" The attorney answered without hesitation, "Because she's organized." Travis gave a faint, humorless smile. "That sounds like Avery." "It does." Another section of the folder appeared. Vendor correspondence, warranty registrations, material purchase confirmations, change orders, delivery receipts. Everything was arranged with remarkable consistency. The attorney paused. "Notice something?" Travis continued flipping through the pages. "No missing pieces." "Exactly." Another page revealed copies of electronic payments. Some came directly from joint accounts. Others came from Avery's individual account. He looked twice, then a third time. "I didn't know she paid this invoice." The attorney glanced down. "She did." Travis turned another page. "And this one?" "Yes." "What about?" He stopped. The answer was already in front of him. Payment after payment, project after project, years of contributions he had never truly measured, not because Avery had hidden them, because he had assumed they would simply always be there. His attorney folded both hands together. "Travis," he looked up, "North Carolina doesn't automatically divide everything equally. I know, but marital contributions matter." The attorney gently tapped the folder. "This documentation establishes those contributions." Travis looked back toward the records. His mind drifted unexpectedly. Avery sitting at the dining room table with her laptop open. Stacks of papers neatly arranged beside her. He remembered teasing her. "You and those receipts." She had smiled without looking up. "Someday you'll appreciate them." He laughed back then. He hadn't understood. Now, he wished he had listened more carefully. The attorney continued reviewing the file. There are photographs showing the condition of the property before several improvements. Another page. There are contractor statements confirming payment schedules. Another page. There are inspection reports tied directly to renovation dates. Another page. There are records showing warranty registrations completed under Avery's organization. Travis slowly leaned back in his chair. He wasn't overwhelmed by the amount of paperwork. He was overwhelmed by what it represented, weekend after weekend, evening after evening, decision after decision. She hadn't simply written checks. She had carried responsibility. Quietly, consistently, without asking anyone to notice. The attorney closed the folder halfway. "I've practiced family law for a long time." Travis remained silent. "Most people bring emotions first." He rested his hand on the paperwork. Avery brought records. Travis nodded slowly. "That sounds like her. No accusations, no exaggerations, no unnecessary arguments, just documentation." The room became quiet. Outside, traffic continued moving through downtown Charlotte. Inside, Travis found himself staring at the edge of the table instead of the paperwork. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about property, he was thinking about partnership. How many evenings had she spent balancing budgets while he answered emails? How many weekends had she quietly handled invoices while he focused on construction schedules? How many conversations had ended with him saying, "Leave business to me"? The memory landed harder now than it ever had before, because he finally understood something he hadn't understood while living it. Avery had never been trying to control his business. She had been protecting the life they were building together. The attorney finally closed the folder completely. The sound echoed softly across the room. He looked directly at Travis. "She isn't trying to take your house." The sentence lingered. Travis slowly raised his eyes. A pause settled between them. Then the attorney spoke again. "She's proving she helped build it." For several long seconds Travis said nothing, because deep down, he already knew the attorney wasn't talking only about the house. The courthouse looked almost ordinary on the morning everything became official. People entered carrying briefcases, backpacks, coffee cups, and folders tucked beneath their arms. Some hurried toward elevators. Others waited quietly on wooden benches, reviewing paperwork one last time. Life continued inside the building with calm efficiency. For Avery, the atmosphere felt strangely familiar. She had spent years helping people organize financial documents at the bank. Today, she carried another neatly arranged folder. Not because she expected a fight, because preparation had always been her way of respecting important moments. She walked through security, thanked the officer who directed her toward the correct courtroom, and found a seat near the back of the hallway. A few minutes later, Travis stepped off the elevator. For the first time since the night she left, their eyes met without a wall or a doorway between them. Neither rushed toward the other. Neither looked away. Travis gave a small nod. "Morning." "Good morning." His voice sounded different, quieter, not defeated, just thoughtful. For a second it seemed as though both of them were remembering a different morning years earlier, when they had stood inside a church promising to build a life together. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It simply acknowledged how much had changed. When their case was called, they entered the courtroom side by side without speaking. The room was smaller than either of them had imagined. No crowded gallery, no dramatic speeches, no raised voices, only a judge, a court reporter, and the attorneys seated at opposite tables. The discussion moved carefully through the facts, dates, property records, financial disclosures, renovation history. Each person spoke respectfully. Whenever Avery answered a question, she did so calmly and directly. Whenever Travis responded, he did the same. No one interrupted, no one exaggerated. The truth didn't need dramatic language, it only needed clarity. At one point, the judge reviewed documentation showing years of improvements made during the marriage. Invoices, payment confirmations, permits, photographs, the same records Travis had already seen. The judge looked up. "These documents are thorough." Avery answered simply, "I believe important financial records should always be kept. Nothing more." She didn't speak about sacrifice. She didn't list every weekend she had devoted to the house. She allowed the documents to tell that story on their own. Travis listened quietly. Months earlier, he might have viewed every page as evidence against him. Now he saw something different. Every receipt represented a decision they had once made together. Every invoice reminded him of evenings spent around the kitchen table discussing their future. Every photograph captured a season when they believed they were building something permanent. Those papers weren't attacking him. They were preserving a history he had failed to appreciate while living it. The legal discussion remained focused on fairness. No one argued over pride. No one treated marriage like a business transaction. The attorneys addressed practical matters. The judge asked thoughtful questions. The process reflected what Avery had hoped for from the beginning: resolution, not revenge. During a brief pause, Travis found himself looking toward Avery again. She sat with the same quiet composure she had carried from the first day they met at the habitat build. Her posture remained steady. Her attention never wandered. She wasn't trying to win. She was simply telling the truth. For the first time, Travis understood something that had escaped him for years. He had spent too much of the marriage thinking about ownership. Avery had spent it thinking about partnership. Those two ideas had lived under the same roof, but they had never meant the same thing. The hearing concluded without hostility. The judge thanked both parties for conducting themselves respectfully throughout the proceedings. As everyone gathered their documents, the room remained almost silent. There were no celebrations, no dramatic exits, only two people accepting that some endings could still be handled with dignity. Avery closed her folder carefully and stood. Travis gathered his papers more slowly. As they walked toward the courtroom door, neither spoke immediately. The legal questions had been answered, but one conversation still remained. It was the conversation they should have had long before either of them ever walked into a courthouse. The courthouse hallway gradually emptied. Attorneys disappeared into elevators. Families walked toward the parking garage. The sound of footsteps slowly faded until only a handful of people remained. Avery stepped outside. The afternoon sun had finally pushed through the clouds, warming the courthouse steps. She stood for a moment, taking a slow breath. The legal process was over. The emotional part wasn't. She had just reached the sidewalk when she heard Travis's voice behind her. Avery. She stopped walking. Not because she was surprised, because she had always believed there would eventually be one conversation neither paperwork nor attorneys could have for them. She turned. Travis stood several feet away. He didn't move any closer. "I know I don't have the right to ask," he said quietly, "but could we talk for a few minutes?" Avery looked at him for a long moment. She searched his face. Months earlier, she would have expected defensiveness, excuses, another attempt to explain why he was right. Instead, she saw someone carrying the weight of finally understanding something too late. She nodded once. "All right." They walked to a small public bench beneath a row of oak trees overlooking the courthouse lawn. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Cars passed. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead. The silence wasn't awkward. It simply gave both of them time to find honest words. Finally, Travis spoke. "I've replayed that night in my head more times than I can count." Avery listened. "I kept telling myself I only said those words because I was stressed." He looked down at his hands. "But that's not completely true." He took another breath. "I was stressed. But stress doesn't create beliefs, it reveals them." His voice nearly disappeared on the last sentence. "And I believed things I should never have believed." Avery remained quiet. He continued. "I thought paying the mortgage before we met somehow made me more important than everything we built afterward." He shook his head slowly. "I convinced myself the deed mattered more than the life inside the house." He looked toward her. "I was wrong." There was no expectation in his voice. No hope that the apology would erase the past. Only honesty. "I should have listened when you spoke. I should have thanked you more. I should have treated every decision as ours instead of mine." His eyes filled, but he never looked away. "I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to hear me say it." The words settled gently between them. Avery looked across the courthouse lawn before answering. "When we first met," she smiled faintly, "you thanked every volunteer on that habitat build. I remember thinking, here's someone who notices people." Travis closed his eyes briefly. "I used to. You did." She nodded. "You really did." She folded her hands together. "I don't think you became a bad man. I think you slowly stopped noticing the person standing closest to you." Travis lowered his head. She continued quietly. "You know what hurt the most?" He looked back at her. "It wasn't the sentence." He frowned slightly. "It wasn't?" She shook her head. "No. What hurt was realizing you'd been feeling that way long before you finally said it. The truth settled over both of them. I kept asking myself where I had failed, she continued. I went through conversations in my head. I wondered if I'd worked too much, if I'd stopped listening, if I'd missed signs. She smiled sadly. Then one morning I realized something. What? I had spent years trying to become more valuable to someone who had quietly stopped seeing my value. Neither spoke. A breeze carried fallen leaves across the sidewalk. After several moments, Travis asked the question he had been afraid to ask since the day she left. Why didn't you fight me? Avery looked at him with gentle surprise. I did. He frowned. No, you walked away. I fought for us for years. Her answer came without anger. I fought every time I tried to help with the business. I fought every time I stayed patient after being interrupted. I fought every time I chose another conversation instead of another argument. I fought every time I believed tomorrow would feel different. She paused. The night I left, I wasn't giving up. I was accepting that I couldn't carry a marriage by myself. Travis stared quietly at the ground. He had no answer, because none existed. After another long silence, he asked one final question. Did you ever want the house? Avery smiled softly. The question almost made her laugh. No. She looked directly into his eyes. I never wanted the house. I wanted to belong inside it. I wanted to hear you say our home without thinking twice. I wanted my opinions to matter before problems became emergencies. I wanted to feel like we were building one future instead of living two separate lives under the same roof. A tear slipped down Travis's face. He didn't wipe it away. Everything he had believed ownership meant suddenly felt painfully small. Avery stood slowly. So many people think a home is something you buy. She adjusted the strap of her handbag. My grandparents taught me something different. She smiled with quiet warmth. A home is something both people keep choosing every ordinary day. She looked at him one last time. I truly hope you have that someday. Not with bitterness, not as punishment, as a sincere hope. Travis stood too. I don't deserve that kindness. This isn't about deserving, she answered gently. It's about the kind of person I decided I wanted to remain. She extended her hand. He looked at it for a second before shaking it carefully. No promises, no dramatic reconciliation, no suggestion that everything could be repaired, only mutual respect, the kind they had needed years earlier. As Avery turned and walked toward her car, Travis remained where he was, watching her leave for the second time. The first time he had believed she would come back. This time, he finally understood why she couldn't. Autumn arrived quietly in Charlotte. The summer heat finally loosened its grip, and cool mornings encouraged people to linger a little longer over coffee before beginning their day. Life continued moving forward. It always had. It always would. For Avery, moving forward didn't happen because the pain disappeared. It happened because she stopped allowing pain to decide who she would become. A few weeks after the courthouse conversation, she unlocked the doors of the regional bank just as she had done hundreds of mornings before. Her co-workers noticed something different. Not excitement, not sadness, peace. The kind that settles slowly after someone has made peace with a difficult decision. One afternoon, an elderly customer smiled as Avery finished helping him organize paperwork for his savings account. I've seen you for years, he said. You always seem patient. Avery laughed softly. I haven't always felt patient. None of us do. He folded his documents carefully. But patience usually shows up after life gives us enough reasons to practice it. She smiled. I think you're right. As he walked away, Avery found herself thinking about how often wisdom arrived through ordinary conversations. Not speeches, not dramatic moments, just simple truths offered at exactly the right time. Her condo slowly became more than a temporary place to stay. She uncovered the furniture she had once protected with white sheets. She hung framed family photographs on the walls. Her grandmother's handwritten recipes returned to the kitchen. Fresh flowers appeared on the dining table every Sunday afternoon after church. Soft jazz once again drifted through the rooms while she prepared dinner. For the first time in years, every decision inside the home belonged completely to her. She didn't mistake that independence for loneliness. She understood the difference. Living alone wasn't what brought peace. Living somewhere her voice mattered did. Her financial habits remained exactly the same. Every paycheck followed a plan. Savings grew steadily. Household expenses stayed organized. The fireproof document box rested inside a hallway closet, unopened for weeks at a time because it no longer represented uncertainty. It simply represented responsibility. The same lesson her grandparents had spent a lifetime teaching her. One evening she smiled while balancing her monthly budget. Not because numbers made her happy, because they reminded her she had choices. Financial independence had never been about proving she could survive without someone else. It had been about making sure love was always a choice, never a necessity born from fear. Across town, Travis continued rebuilding his business one project at a time. Some contracts returned, others didn't. He worked hard, perhaps harder than ever. But something about the way he approached people had changed. He listened longer during meetings, he interrupted less, he thanked employees more often. When younger contractors asked questions, he answered with patience instead of rushing through explanations. The lesson Avery left behind reached further than their marriage. It quietly reshaped the man he was still becoming. One Saturday morning, Travis volunteered at another Habitat for Humanity build. It had been months since he last picked up a hammer alongside volunteers. The neighborhood looked familiar. Children laughed while carrying bottled water to workers. Fresh lumber rested in neat stacks beside unfinished walls. For several moments he simply stood there. Memories returned naturally. A cardboard box breaking open, metal brackets scattered across gravel, a woman kneeling to help without complaining. "I'm Travis. Avery." He smiled sadly. The memory no longer filled him with regret alone. It reminded him of the man he had once hoped to become. A volunteer struggled to lift a heavy window frame. Without hesitation, Travis walked over. "Let's carry it together." The young volunteer smiled. "Thanks." As they set the frame into place, the volunteer looked around. "I hope someday I can build a home like this." Travis looked toward the unfinished house, then answered carefully. "You can." He paused. "But don't forget something." The volunteer waited. "Building a house is the easy part." He smiled gently. "Building a home takes two people who never stop making each other feel like they belong." The young volunteer nodded thoughtfully. He had no idea those words came from experience. Late one Sunday afternoon, Avery returned home carrying a small bag of groceries. Golden sunlight stretched across the parking lot as she climbed the steps to her condo. She reached into her purse. Her fingers closed around her keys. For a brief moment she stopped. Months earlier, those same keys had represented heartbreak. Tonight, they represented something entirely different. She unlocked the front door, stepped inside, closed it gently behind her. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh flowers welcomed her. The framed photographs on the wall reflected years of love that still mattered, even if life had taken an unexpected direction. She placed the groceries on the kitchen counter before walking toward the living room window. Outside, children rode bicycles through the neighborhood, while neighbors waved to one another from nearby porches. Ordinary life, the kind she had always loved. She smiled. Not because everything had turned out the way she once imagined, because she had finally stopped measuring happiness by what she had lost. Instead, she measured it by what she had refused to lose. Her dignity, her kindness, her discipline, her ability to love without surrendering herself. Those things had survived, and they always would. Sometimes people believe ownership is proven by a signature on a deed. Sometimes they believe the person who earns more carries the greater responsibility. Life has a quiet way of correcting those ideas. A house can be purchased, it can be renovated, it can be expanded, it can become more beautiful with every passing year. But none of those things create a home. A home is built in ordinary moments. It grows through respect. It is strengthened by gratitude. It survives because two people continue choosing partnership instead of pride. Travis once believed the deed made the house his. Avery understood something different. A home never truly belongs to the person whose name appears on paperwork. It belongs to the people who make one another feel valued every single day, and the moment respect disappears. The walls may still stand, the roof may never leak, the lights may still come on every evening, yet the feeling of home quietly slips away. If this story stayed with you, let it be a reminder that appreciation is rarely shown through grand gestures. More often, it's revealed in everyday conversations, shared decisions, and making sure the person beside you never has to wonder whether they matter. Thank you for spending this time with us on Mr. Wisdom Stories. If this story touched your heart, consider sharing it with someone you care about, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Before we say goodbye, think about this one question. If someone told you that you had nothing left to come home to, what would you have carried with you besides your keys?